thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Sean.
Yes. Now let's start in the beginning. I mean, we know your names. You are High Commissioner Sbu Ndebele, but one would want to know, who is High Commissioner Ndebele, and how then did you join the diplomatic service?
Well, where do I start?
Yes, somewhere in the beginning.
Well, the beginning is not long. I was in government for over 20 years, where I was mostly in the field of transport, MEC of transport in KwaZulu-Natal for 10 years, and then Premier of the province of KwaZulu-Natal for 5 years, the first ANC Premier in that very difficult province. I'm sure you know the significance. Then, of course, I then became National Minister of Transport. Then became Minister of Correctional Services. So that's the background.
Yes.
Before that, of course, one had been in the notorious Robben Island for 10 years. Nelson Mandela was not just our hero there, he was our role model in prison uniform. That even then you must pick up your dignity and maintain it right through. So that's background. But of course, after 2014, I was then asked to come in this department, first posted in Australia, which is, they say, is down under. You come to Australia because you're coming there. It's not that we're passing by. So that is quite a very isolated place, but very dynamic. And then in 2018, I was appointed to come to India, and I started in 2019. The brief coming from the leadership, government, ministers, was that India sort of needed somebody with some background, particularly with the Indian community, and both in terms of just familiarity with politics, but particularly familiarity with the politics of KwaZulu-Natal, where you really have got very distinct communities there, the African community, mostly Zulu-speaking, then the Indian community, and then the white community. Very sort of standalone communities, as it were. And one needed someone who had an understanding of Indian culture and Indian politics, as it was said by the leadership then, that for a long time we needed to energize our relationship with India. It had a lot of potential. India being then the second largest in terms of population, we're told this year.
After China?
We're told this January that it had just overtaken China in terms of population. Yeah, so that's where we are. It needs a very broad approach. So it's not just a political mission. It needs to entrench our relations that have been forged really in a very, very remarkable way. We have got sort of common founders, as it were, because the founder and the father figure of India is Mahatma Gandhi. But Mahatma Gandhi was nobody when he left India for South Africa. He became what he was in South Africa. It was South Africa that matured Mahatma Gandhi from just an ordinary Mr. Gentleman Gandhi to be a Mahatma Gandhi. It was in South Africa where even how we were going to call this passive resistance was debated by Gandhi and his colleagues in South Africa. What do we call it? Passive resistance. It's such a huge, noble effort. Why should we call it in an English name that means nothing? And then they tried some other names, and then they arrived into this satyagraha. All that was in South Africa. By the time he came to South Africa, to India, he had already experimented with passive resistance, with negotiations, passive resistance, and further negotiations with the highest that were the Jan Smuts, who were the co-founders of the United League of Nations and the United Nations, and he had negotiated with people like those. So then even the name itself that was adopted by the liberation movement, the African National Congress, the name Congress really came from the Indian Congress, which was the first really black organization that was formed in South Africa in 1894. And then later on, then in 1912, we formed the African National Congress. So there was a lot of affinity. And we needed to dig deep into that affinity, a common past, which had a very weak present, and make it a very strong future.
30 years of diplomatic relations between South Africa and India in 2023. And obviously, as you've just alluded, these relations start even beyond that historically. How are we in terms of our relations with with India and its community?
Sometimes what we don't usually say is that India was the first to break diplomatic relations with apartheid South Africa in 1946, even before they assumed independence in 1947. Remember that interim government. And they were the first to raise this matter very sharply at the United Nations. It was very sharply raised, and it became on the agenda of the United Nations from that time, 1946 to 1994. It was a permanent item at the United Nations, and it was India that had spearheaded that, and it became a very critical pillar of our struggle. We had mass struggles, we had the underground, we had armed struggle, but the most visible and effective pillar was one of the international isolation of apartheid South Africa and the recognition of the people of South Africa through their legitimate leadership. And we don't usually say this, but we've got diplomatic cars as we come here. But South Africa was first recognized not in 1994, but in 1986, when they took our official representative here, and gave him diplomatic status. In 1986, already he was driving a CD 126, I think it was. Our official number now is CD 95. It was CD 123. We really had diplomatic status by that time. Of course, we as a liberation movement in South Africa, we did not want to be seen, in what is called the government in exile. So that was modestly accepted, but it allowed us a lot of. It gave us a key to a lot more doors, that recognition. And then, of course, in 1993, November, the 22 November, finally, we then entered into formal diplomatic relations. So we are celebrating 30 years this year. And it's been a very, very glorious relationship.
Any plans for the 30-year celebrations, maybe planned from your side and also from the Indian side?
From our side, one of the things that we're preparing to do, there's just technical things that we're doing now, to erecting a Mandela statue. We have had a donation from well-disposed people to say there are statues of Gandhi in South Africa. So why is there no statue of Mandela in India? And of course, we had to examine that quite deeply, because it's better not to have a statue than to have someone asking why is there a statue of Mandela.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, the welcome question is the one that is being asked now: why is there no statue of Mandela? So that is in preparation. The practical part of it has been done, because we've got a donation. The area has been identified. We are just sorting out the technicalities before we put it up. It's one of the symbols of that. And the other one, of course, that was we lost regretfully, is the direct flight. So there's nothing that is going to cement the relationship of people of South Africa and the people of India more than a direct flight from India to South Africa. We had that, and of course we lost it, and we are reviving it. There is a commitment by the South African government to have that, but there is more commitment by the Indian government to have that. In fact, the two airlines had been identified before COVID that were going to be flying to South Africa, and then COVID sort of spoiled that rhythm that we are regaining that rhythm now, and we hope that shortly, or rather before long, that flight will open up. It will do a lot of things, because I'm sure your own experience coming here was that when you fly from South Africa, from Johannesburg, you see the flight being full, and you think, well, those people maybe are going to Dubai or maybe going to somewhere else and so forth, and you stop in Dubai, and then the flight is still full, which indicates any time, whether it's beginning of the year, middle of the year, any time it's full, so that there is a lot of communication or a lot of movement between the people in India and people in South Africa on their own, because these are kin and kith. People have got families in India, people have got families in South Africa. When they get married, they want to come via India for the final blessings and so forth. And when they die, most of the time they bring ashes to be scattered in the Ganges River here and all that. So it's quite a very deep relationship, but politically it's a very, very deep relationship. Not just with one party, but generally with the political leadership of India.
We also participate with India in multilateral platforms like IORA, IBSA, and also with the BRICS. Does this mean that we share common ideals with India, and do we have a lot of areas of agreement in these multilateral spaces?
There is something that very interesting that was said by the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs here, Dr. Jaishankar, when he was talking about their relationship with the Americans. He was saying that it's sometimes puzzling why the Americans think that what are their friends should be our friends, what are their enemies should be our enemies. You were saying that in relation to the current position of that India has adopted, which is the same as that of South Africa. And because we've got our own wishes and objectives as a country, and we find common ground in most of those wishes with India. Both of us are still struggling against the vestiges, the aftermath of racism and colonialism, and the deliberate underdevelopment of our people, both educationally, culturally, and politically. Now we've acquired our political freedom, both of us, but that political freedom is only a key to open up what we could not open just as a liberation movement, the economic rights and economic heritage of our people. India is struggling with that, and the devastating effect of poverty and unemployment. We are also dealing with the same. And they've found different avenues to deal with this, not only to say the foreign investor will come and that investor will then employ our people. We know that the modern economy is not made up that way. It actually takes away jobs as it concentrates through new technologies and so forth. So India is finding new ways of dealing with that, and those are very important to us. If I can take just the area of agriculture, I've not heard India still battling with what we call the land question. They've been able to distribute their land and make their small farmers to be quite productive, to supply the people of India with their basic food, rice and wheat and so forth. So and then export over and above that. We haven't reached that in South Africa, where our people, first of all, have got the correct access, the adequate access to land. But the political question of restitution of land is being won. We are winning that politically, and or there is an agreement in principle, and the difference is that we want that thing to be put as an amendment to the Constitution, so that no matter who comes in future, will not find it easier to then repeal that law. So that's a technical issue. But the fundamental issue is, you have land, then what do you do with it? That is going to be the question. Up to now, those who have land, who got the land under this willing buyer, willing seller, it's not being very attractive in that perhaps we are now having a new class of farmers, of black farmers in South Africa. We hardly have those. So that we still have got a lot to study and to borrow from our friends. How have they sorted the land? What has happened to the previously landless in India? Where are they? And who is producing for India? And we should come to the same conclusion in South Africa, that the landless now have land, number one, but they are not only producing for their families, they are producing for the market. And therefore, you really are reaching self-sufficiency in food, which was still quite a bit of distance from. And it's still very important to have the delegations that we started having with step by COVID, but we are having delegations from South Africa that are starting, particularly this cooperative movement in India, which is quite strong, particularly of farmers, of small farmers, working together. And they ask the question, what would be the use of one small farmer with 10 hectares or 5 hectares owning a tractor? What do you do with the tractor the rest of the time? You only bought it for 5 hectares, or even 1 hectare for that matter. But as a cooperative of 10, 30 families, this tractor becomes useful and busy all the time, and producing food for you, for all of you, and better cultivated fields, and you can even cultivate for neighbors as well. So those are all the lessons that one starts seeing in India, and I'm glad that particularly portfolio committees and other delegations are coming here in India and learning those in areas. They come to Delhi, but mostly in Kerala. There's quite a lot of things to learn there, and in other states as well. So that is a type of relationship, the people-to-people relationship that really sustains the relationship between India and South Africa.
One of the key metrics of measuring diplomatic relations is the metric of trade and investment. And sometimes this is in the form of your foreign direct investment.
Sure.
Now, what is the foreign the direct investment between India and South Africa? Where is it leaning towards? And also, what could be done to improve, taking into effect that India has got the biggest population, which then creates a very big market?
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that is why that is the rub, actually, to measure the relationship in terms of the actual trade. At this time, South Africa is the biggest trader with Nigeria in Southern Africa. In Africa, it's number 2 to Nigeria because of oil. Then we fall in number 2. But in terms of manufacturing and manufactured goods and so forth, we are a leading partner with India. So it is let me just check my figures. The foreign direct investment, it's at 8 billion. That is India to South Africa. And of course, South Africa invests about 2 billion in India. But we are looking at that 8 billion. It's we've got a huge potential to increase that to almost 18 billion direct investment. So it's quite very varied as well. So that's what is interesting. It's not just the matter of coal or raw material, and manufactured goods are becoming more increasing. Of course, pharmaceuticals are the key from India.
Now, moving from that, besides sharing these deep historical and political ties, the mutual love for things like cricket, the rich heritage, and warm, hospitable culture and cuisine is what actually helps bind us together as two countries. Now, I guess the question becomes, when you talk about people-to-people exchange mechanisms, the so-called soft power, how are we doing in that regard?
Yeah, when you talk about cuisine, that's one interesting factor, because the distinctive feature of any country is how is their food.
Yes.
And an Indian going to South Africa doesn't have to worry about how is their food, because it's Indian.
Yes.
And a South African coming to India doesn't worry too much about how is their food, because they would have left it at home anyway. Your roti, your pan chow, and so forth, you'll find in India, you'll find it in South Africa, particularly Durban, so that it will be the same. So there's a lot of commonality. And of course, even at the most critical time of your life, significant time of your life, your weddings, there's no South African Indian wedding that is complete without coming to get all your attire and all that in India. And even your death is not complete if your ashes are not going to be sprinkled here in India, in the famous river here, the Ganges. So there is a lot of that. And actually, when I came here in 2019, I was surprised at the multifaceted traffic that exists between South Africa and India.
No.
That is not, it's got nothing to do with government.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just people to people.
India is hosting the G20 this year, and then currently we are due to also attend the foreign ministers meeting. What could be some of the key expected outcomes from this particular foreign ministers summit and the actual summit at the end of the year?
Yes, India is hosting the BRICS. It's hosting the G20, very significant. And I'm sure when you enter the airport, you saw the posters everywhere. It's very widely publicized that India is hosting the G20 this year, and they are taking that very, very seriously. In fact, by the end of January, they published more than 200 functions, gatherings, to commemorate that so that by the time their chairship of the G20 ends at the end of the year, they will have reached out so much to India that they had not reached before. The way they are using their chairmanship of G20 is really very embracive of the Indian people, so that they start appreciating the place of India in the world. That is very important for the ordinary people to appreciate the place of India in the world. I hope we do the same as we chair BRICS, so that people know that such opportunities are actually rare and they are very important. And you are the mouthpiece of how many people are in SADC, of so many millions, almost 100 million, so many millions. And at this current time, the mouthpiece of BRICS is South Africa. At this time, the mouthpiece of easily 75% of the world through G20 is India, and they are using that very, very effectively to increase their business opportunities and academic, professional opportunities, and I think we've got quite a lot to learn from that.
Lastly, High Commissioner, to South Africans at home who are thinking, you know what, it sounds like a great country, I want to visit India too, what would you say to them?
Well, all I'd say personally, in your own love life, you've not done it all until you've been to the Taj Mahal, you know.